Welcome to another session of the Educational AD. Welcome everyone to the Educational AD podcast. We're very excited today. Our guest is Andy Warner. Andy's the director of Warner Soccer in Tallahassee, Florida, and he's also an award-winning and most recently Hall of Fame soccer coach. Andy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jake. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay. Well, Andy, we always like to start off with letting our listeners get to know our guests. So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, where you went to school.
Well, I born in Lancaster, England, northern town, right down the Irish Sea, historical town, community orientated. Went to the Castle Secondary School. Sport was a big part of our life, as you can imagine, in Britain, and played sports my whole life growing up there. However, influenced my mother, unlike other mothers, was convinced that education was going to be the way forward for me. I grew up at a time, Jake, which would be hard for listeners, but if you did not get on the college track in Britain, you would leave school at 15. So most of the players that I played with and students had this desire to become a professional soccer player at 15 and all left school. My mother said that was a non-starter and she focused on me staying in school. And fortunately for me, I stayed at school, played soccer, played competitive soccer, representative soccer, but ended up staying at school and getting a degree. And went to a school at Edgehill College, PE trained in Liverpool, England. And great education school, taught physical education only, specialized school, and learned that education and physical education was an important part of the curriculum in Britain. Was very fortunate to, in playing days, got invited to come on tour with Blackpool coming to United States of America. That was in 1977. And came over and we played all the Midwest universities, Western Illinois University, SIU, Edwardsville, Quincy College, and all my teammates for 3 weeks thought it was just a great time to be in America. And I saw it another way. I met a gentleman called John McKenzie. He was the soccer coach at Western, and he was a tremendous host. But he showed me what was going on within the American university system, and I actually was very spellbound by what I saw and the opportunities I saw. And I kept in contact with John and went back to England, finished my degree. I managed to stay at college, played competitive soccer with Morecambe. My soccer coach, ironically, because of the cultural aspect of education in Britain, did not know that I was going to college. That was a no-no, playing soccer in England. But I was very fortunate. John McKenzie called me one day and said, we have an opportunity at Western Illinois University. Would you be interested in coming to take a new program in sports administration? Western was one of 3 universities at the time. Ohio University, Ohio State, and Western was starting a sports admin program. Didn't understand what it was, but what was appealing to me was it was an opportunity to come and work and live in the United States. So I took that opportunity and became an assistant coach at a Division I school. It was a wonderful experience. Ended up, through that experience, with John telling me to get an internship, and ended up getting an internship with the Tampa Bay Rowdies soccer club. And that was my foray into the world of soccer in the United States. Incredible experience, surrounded by incredible people. And I ended up getting my master's degree, could not get a visa to stay in the country because playing-wise, the Rowdies were not going to spend money on a visa for me. And so I went back to England, started to teach and coach, and very fortunately, John McKenzie called back and said that the school was pressed. Would you come back to be a faculty assistant, and would you do a postmaster's degree in educational leadership? Again, another fantastic opportunity, and it was that choice again of my education or signing with Wrexham Football Club as Division I club at the time. Again, talking with my mother, who was the visionary in our family, I opted to come to the United States, and kind of that was phase one, and that was the big decision.
Well, again, you kind of hit on it. You were following two tracks. You were on that professional athlete track and being quite successful. And at the same time, you had your college degree and aspirations in that area. So well played. When you got back to the United States that second time, I know your career took a couple different paths. Why don't you go and elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I tell you, and looking at the times we're in today, people may not know this, but in the early 1980s, we were going through, the United States was going through a big dip economically. And the Educational Administration Leadership Program was a tremendous program because it was a pioneer program, because a lot of the classes were actual in-school projects. So doing the leadership, we were going into school systems and evaluating school systems. And at the time, we were looking at a school system in Peoria, Illinois. And what was interesting was that we were having an economical downturn, and people who know about the Midwest, but in Peoria, two of the biggest employers were Caterpillar. And what was happening, of course, with the downturn, people were being laid off. And what we find out is as people are laid off and economy gets bad, the one thing that suffers immediately is education. And I remember being part of a series of programs of evaluating cutbacks for programs, and how do we identify the ongoing programs, and how do we make recommendations. And I remember being part of a one-year study to try and make these recommendations. And when it was all said and done, I think the thing that kind of geared me away from educational administration was all the thousands of hours of work put in. Eventually, the politicians came in and said, well, here's how we're going to deal with it. We're going to close schools, and we're going to lay off teachers, which is what they did. And so I was coaching at the time and had opportunities. And through my internships, what had happened, I was very fortunate. I applied for 2 college jobs, was accepted on 2 jobs. And what I found with the job opportunities was that they were very insular, and there was no vision. It was, here's the position, it's a maintenance position. And as one administrator told me, there's only 2 things you need to know, is don't exceed your budget and don't embarrass the school. I thought as guidelines that was somewhat limiting. So the listeners to this, I didn't accept those positions. I thought that was too narrow. But I ended up getting a call from Gordon Hill, who was the guy who gave me my internship, and he had just been hired by a British company called Umbro. And Umbro was a leading sporting manufacturer worldwide, very famous, and they were starting a company in the United States. We were bought by Stone Manufacturing, an American company, and they wanted an interesting grassroots marketing campaign to promote not only the sport, but to promote the product and to educate. And so they formed a soccer education division. Really interesting concept back in the day. There was no professional athletes to market the products as other standard sports were doing that. So we developed, and my coordinating job nationally was to develop a grassroots program with local retailers, local representatives, and soccer clubs, and actually develop an education format to educate parents, educate coaches, educate retailers about soccer. But of course, the most important messaging is why Umbro would be the brand that gets you to where you need to go. But it was an incredible experience. Travel around the country, made hundreds and hundreds of appearances. But the thing that got me excited was without the school involvement, without facilities, without a vision, you couldn't promote your program. And back in those days, as you know, trying to get any airtime for the sport of soccer was very difficult. But that's kind of the second phase, and had 3 great years there at Umbro. But I'd met my wife, Lisa, at university. She's a sports administrator herself. We moved to Greenville, South Carolina. In the early 80s, it was not the city it is today. It was a growing concern. She was not enamored by me being on the road. And we ended up moving to Florida, where a gentleman called Mr. Colin Phipps who was a visionary. That's all I will say about Colin. An incredible man, born into a very famous family, Phipps family, and he owned a lot of land, a lot of development. But he had a vision for soccer. He wanted to develop soccer. And when I met the guy, we spoke for about 5 hours. And he just had this vision that we've got to create facilities, we've got to develop educational platforms if we're going to promote the sport. He was about 30 years ahead of his time. And I remember coming to work with him as a CEO and going around communities saying that this gentleman wants to do a public-private partnership. He wants to give you money. And I remember going into many municipalities and many areas and people like, what's the deal with this guy? Why does somebody want to give money? Because in those days, in sports, that was just not an accepted away approach. So, you know, I worked for Colin for 5.5 years. We bought professional soccer teams. We developed different aspects of what was going on. And then, like most sports teams, we want to move to a bigger city, to Orlando. We bought the Orlando Lions professional soccer team. And it was one of those seminal moments for me where I looked at where my future was going to be. And I hadn't chosen the professional path in Britain. I'd been involved in the professional game over here. And again, I decided that wasn't for me. And Colin gave me an opportunity to start an education company in Tallahassee, Florida, access to facilities, and said, here's your opportunity, take it. And that's when I formed Warner Soccer. And we've been in business for 30 years.
Well, that brings us to, you know, what I really want to talk about. You know, you have, you know, probably the premier soccer organization, you know, in the state of Florida, and you have also managed to be highly successful in a school-based program, which, you know, unfortunately is not always the case. You know, it seems like, you know, a coach either does school or does club, if you will, and you've managed to be incredibly successful in both. And as the athletic director at Maclay, you know, I've had the privilege of working with you these past 4 years. So talk a little bit about your development of Warner Soccer and you know, how that started, how it got going. And I know that's a show in of itself. And then
Sure.
also how you got involved with Maclay so many years ago and why you're still involved, you know, with Maclay in a school-based program. Can you do that for our listeners?
Well, I'll make it simple in the sense that, to me, it all boils down to these guiding principles, and the guiding principles or the impact starting with my mom, and the idea that education is important. That growing up, create a set of values that respect is absolutely tantamount to your success. Treat people the correct way, treat people the right way, respect your elders, do things the right way. We were brought up in a very poor area in Lancaster, England. We lived in public housing. We went to public school. But I will tell you, Jake, in hindsight, we thought we had everything. We had a school that cared. We had teachers. It was a safe environment. We had our school meals provided for. We had the boys and girls, the boys club, particularly for me. And so therefore, when I came to Tallahassee, what I noticed was that there was a lot of people with a lot of ideas. And rather than me coming in and saying, look, this is my background, here's what I'm recommending, the first order of business was to truly get a lay of the land, to do some listening, to go and talk to stakeholders, to see actually not what was out there, but what was in people's minds. And so I spent probably 3 months meeting, lunches and everything with people involved in the sport itself. And what I found out was that all the people that were being involved in soccer had never played the game. They all played other sports, like yourself. And what I also realized was that sports people have a commonality. They have a passion for their sport. And when you see a passion and you work with people who have a passion and have a vision, you know that things can get done. But what I also found out that when I moved to Maclay was that Maclay is a great institution, but like everything else, you have limited resources. And if you're not careful, if you don't kind of get in on the planning side of it, if you're not careful, you get into a kind of a battle or a fight for those resources. So I looked at the school setting at Maclay as I did with starting Warner Soccer, and as a resource issue. Well, what do schools have? They've got access to usually good facilities, opportunities to schedule, opportunities to get community involvement, parent involvement. So I said, okay, I'm going to come up with a 3-point plan. The first thing is you have to secure facilities. Without facilities, you can't build a program. And what that means is either you've got to have your own facilities, or you've got to build an alliance like I did with the city of Tallahassee, or we built an alliance with Maclay. And what we did was to say, okay, here are our facilities, here's what our short-term needs are, but let's sit down with the stakeholders and where do we want to be in 5 years? Where do we need to be 10 years? Because if we're going to start raising money or we're going to start investing and building, we've got to get a clear idea of our capabilities. And one thing I've seen in the sport of soccer in my time is what has really submarined a lot of programs is that they get people excited, they grow, but they grow out of facilities, they grow out of their ability to provide coaches, they grow out of the ability to service with officials. And in the school setting, what I found was that in talking to sports, everybody was working hard raising money for their own programs. But ultimately, we were missing the big picture of, well, how can we share resources? How can we look at common facilities that can benefit everybody involved? And how can we be efficient by if somebody's already got a great fundraiser in the school and it's working, why don't we piggyback on that? And why don't we pool our resources? And that's probably one of the most successful things that I saw being at Maclay School, was our ability of the shared vision and developing a total sports program. And therefore, you look at the facilities, you look at your staffing, and we've got some outstanding coaches who are not necessarily soccer being their primary sport, but because they're outstanding coaches and they understand the student athlete's needs, we brought them into our soccer program. They've had a background in it. It's not their primary sport, but they do a great job with our middle school program and our JV program. So I think resource allocation, identifying what you have is in particularly in today's world, I think is critical to the future. I really do.
Again, you've had a very long, successful career. I think you're just maybe getting started. You got a few more good years left in you. As an administrator, and again, you're a coach at Maclay, but you direct our soccer program. But as the CEO, basically, of Warner Soccer, you're definitely an athletic administrator. You're dealing on a very large level with teams and coaches and schedules and officials and parents, et cetera, budgets. How has your job as an administrator changed in the past, let's just narrow it down, maybe the last 10 years compared to what you're doing today as an administrator? How's the job changed?
It's a great question, and I would say one of the most difficult aspects, I think, of being an administrator, and it's something that I learned very early on because I had great people to guide me. And Western Illinois' educational leadership program and sports admin program was an outstanding program. Some great people have come through the program. But the thing that was real critical was a self-analysis of your own strengths and skills as an administrator. And I took several tests, and I went to several leadership schools, and I went to the University of Michigan to do a sports marketing program with the great Don Canham, and I got all this knowledge. And one of the things I listened to some of these folks is find out what your strengths are. And when you build a program, focus on your strengths, and then look at those areas of where you don't have strengths, or you don't have time, or you don't have the passion, and bring in great people. And we all talk about great people. It was very clear from the outset for me, the way my brain works and the way I brought it up with my attention, my passion for it, that I'm a strategic thinker. I like to think ahead. Where can we be in 5 years? How can we bring this person together? My day-to-day desire to be in front of a computer or being able to follow through was never one of my strong skills. So clearly for me, what was important was to bring in people who have those skill sets, the eye for detail, the follow through, the day-to-day communication with the rank and file parents, and so from that perspective, more so ever today, particularly the pandemic that we're dealing with right now, it's developing a plan of action with the right people to communicate. You cannot over-communicate in today's world. And I also think it's important that any aspect of your program regarding student athlete that's important, that we need to get the good news out. I think it's absolutely critical to put your best foot forward, because there's so much negativity, there's so much disillusionment right now. I think that this concept of, where do you stand or what position sports is the one area where, and I like to say this, and you've heard me say this before, the great thing about sports in America is rivalries. And I think what's critical is that to develop a healthy rivalry, to develop a competitive stance towards a program, and to compete on a field, but professionally to respect one another off the field, I think it's got to be the way forward for us. I really think that professional alliances with athletic directors, with sports coaches, it's got to be the future. If we want the sports to continue to be at the forefront, we've got to get people all on the same page. We don't always agree on the refereeing, but we've got to understand that without these ingredients and without these elements, our sports and our future is going to be severely limited. And I feel that very strongly.
You mentioned leadership multiple times, the influence of your mother, certain coaches. Who are a couple other mentors for you that have had a big impact on your career?
Well, John McKenzie, the head coach at West Illinois, he's from Massachusetts, and he was best man at my wedding. That's how much I thought of the man. He was a straightforward, direct sportsman, the ultimate. He loved all sports. He got involved in the sport of soccer when it wasn't fashionable. But what he was able to do in a 35-year career was fashion relationships and fashion a sports program that brought the best out of people. And John always used to say to me, Andy, at the end of the day, you play hard, you compete hard. He was just such a hard competitor, but you build relationships. You know what I'm saying? And some of the best memories you have are the people who are the toughest, hardest nosed opponents. But at the end of the day, build rivalries, build something that has meaning. And I never forgot that. And then, of course, he also gave me the smartest advice, which was, if you make one good decision in life, marry the right person. So I listened to him. So, but John was just a great pioneer back in the day, and the respect. We had a 30-year reunion. And to tell you, if you want to know how respectful, there was literally hundreds of student athletes came back to see him. It was a great day.
You mentioned COVID a couple times. It's kind of the gorilla in the room. I'm sure you've seen it nationwide. There's dozens of different responses. Here in the state of Florida, there's multiple responses. So this next question is just laser focused on Tallahassee and Warner Soccer. What are you doing with your organization, your teams, your kids, your coaches, your parents currently with regards to COVID?
So as soon as it hit, we had a couple of folks within our organization that, in their real jobs outside of coaching, work in the federal establishment for these crises. And so the first thing we did, we took a step out of the Maclay booklet as well, is we went to the local authorities with people we knew and said, okay, ultimately what are the recommendations? What do we need to be doing? And we kind of came up with a list of bullet points in terms of our expectations and our approach. And we followed not only the governor's guidelines, obviously the school board here in Tallahassee, we looked at what their guidelines were going to be. We looked at the two national bodies in the soccer world to their guidelines. And what we found was that I think everybody was on the same page, but everybody was having a different approach. Some people had a 3-phased-in program, other people had a 4-phased-in program. My reality was, ultimately, is there a safe way for us to still participate, socially distant, that makes sense for not only for the people that we're participating with, but for ourselves and for the people that work with us. And so we came up with a very, very cautious 3-phase program. and we're still in phase 2. The governor has not come in with phase 3, so we keep it socially distant. We're doing technical work only, small groups, cohorts of 6 or 8 players. We're doing the tracing elements, so we know what the group is, we know what the contact information is. So we're doing all of those things. We've had seminars, online training, we've brought people in. So we feel that we've had a good approach, and the response has been very, very good to us. However, my frustration today is dealing with other soccer organizations that I have a lot of time with. They tell me, oh, we've been playing competitive soccer. We're starting 11v11 right now. And I asked them the rationale. And some of the rationale is, well, one of the big clubs down the road here, they've been doing it. So if it's okay for them, we're going to do it. And I think that's the danger of this, is that ultimately you're either going to follow the recommendations to the letter, and you're going to wait for it and be patient wait for it, because if it continues to develop at the level I believe it's developing, I can only see one rationale: it'll be a complete shutdown again. And I certainly, for one, we're positioning ourselves right now to talk about league play, and we've gone through it. But we were on a Zoom call yesterday in our league, and we've all agreed, until we're categorically cleared by state associations, governors, until all the checklists and the boxes are marked, we're not even contemplating walking on a soccer field to play competitive soccer again. It just makes no rhyme or reason.
And it's going to be interesting to see what happens, just even the rest of this month before we get back to August and supposedly the start of fall sports. We're almost done. You and I have both coached for a long time. We've shared that sideline. There's an old saying that talking about parents, talking about fans, everybody wants our job on Friday night, on game night, but they don't want it on Saturday. They don't want it during the week. They certainly don't want it during the off season. What are some favorite parts of your job, either from an administrative or from a coaching standpoint? What really gets you excited?
Well, what gets me excited is physically coaching on the field. You ask me what motivates me. I mean, if the more time I can be on a field or interacting, the better. The less time in an office, the better. I tell people all the time, and I take real pride in telling people that if I travel for 2 weeks and I leave the office thrives, and I say that in a positive way, because people don't miss a beat. Professional people don't miss a beat. So I am happy with that. I also will say this, and to everybody, to get involved in teaching, in administration, in schools, it's a passion. And ultimately, you can hide that passion. You either enjoy the moment. I also learned that, and again, this comes back from my family days, is that I don't overly get too excited and I don't overly get too low. We've had some great moments, some great state championships, the higher the high, and we've lost in state championships. But at the end of the day, you look at it, and we're all better for the experience. And it's the experience ultimately that I try and focus on, is that winning and losing is part of life. The experience and the people and the relationships that they build, that's what lasts forever. And so to me, that's what keeps going. It's the new group of students that are coming in this year. It's the expectations now, the nervousness of those incoming freshmen. They've got big shoes to fill. We've got a program that works. We want you to come in. It is your program. You can take this program, and one of the things I learned from you, amongst many things, was that this is your program, and you can take this program where you want, and it's already in the right direction. So, as we like to say, if it's not broken, don't screw it up, right? So, but we keep fundamental principles and core beliefs. To me, is the strength of our program. And if I, as a leader, I want to empower people to be able to add to the program. Okay, I want people to add to the program and give them the program, and be proud, because I think at the end of the day, we talk about this word pride, but ultimately, when you get associated in a program and you build a program, that's ultimately, it's the self evaluation, and it's the feeling of achieving something that you can be proud of. And that's, at the end of the day, that's what keeps me going. I can tell you that.
Yeah, you're so right. You mentioned the word program. You know, of all the things that you do so well for our students at Maclay, you know, that sticks out for me. And it's not something that you just snapped your fingers and it happened. You built this over the years. Is this sense of program? You know, you coach our boys varsity team, but you're also, you know, the director of soccer, and so the girls program, they get the same fields, the same quality of coaches, you know, with Paul Dixon and his staff. You have helped develop the JV program for both boys and girls, where those kids get to develop skills, play games, and earn their spot, if it's there, on the varsity. And our wildly successful middle school program, multiple teams, quality coaches. It truly is a program. You know, those appearances in the state championship games these last many years, they don't happen by accident. It's very much the result of a design that you put into place. So we've kind of come to the end, and we always like to wrap up with what I call the athletic director's toolbox. So as an administrator, I'm going to ask you this question. You're going to create a toolbox to give to a brand new athletic director, and you can only put 3 things in that toolbox. What 3 things are going to go in Coach Warner's toolbox?
Well, I think you have a clear idea of your values. I think you need to know where you're coming from as a person, and that the kind of environment that you want to create, because that will have a massive impact on the kind of people that you interface with and you hire, and particularly sports coaches. I think it's absolutely critical in building relationships. You know, I've had a wonderful relationship with you from day one, and I've got on with everybody because we collectively looked at each philosophy, we've listened to one another, and we've added on to it. So I think having a clear sense of value and direction is important. Number 2, I think you've got to structurally understand the makeup of your program. So you've got to be, I think, a very good listener in athletic director. I really do, because a lot of people have got a lot of advice. So somehow you've got to build a program that allows you to listen in a limited period of time, filter through it, and then, you know, clearly indicate to people that, hey, you know, we have an open door policy, and part of our growth is listening to the stakeholders in the program. And then I think the 3rd tool is consistency. If you're going to put a guideline out, you're going to put a rule out, it is clear from day one that rule is for everybody. And because I think the biggest thing I've seen in my world of soccer, professionally, different levels, is that we want to make exceptions. And let's face it, every kid is special, so every parent thinks that there should be an exception. And I've learned through dealing with thousands of students all over the world, the consistency. And if something is so far off and more people come to you and say, hey, I have a problem with this rule, or I have a problem with this guideline, whatever, ultimately, if there's enough people come to you, you may want to review the rule. But when you adopt a rule, and again, the more rules you have, the more potential rules you're going to have broken, and which seems to be a systematic problem in sports, the more rules you have. But clearly, stick by that moral compass you have, but understand that changing rules for one person is going to come back and bite you.
Well, I'm hoping that our listeners are taking all this to heart. You know, I know for a fact what a great you know, leader you are, and what you've done for our school and our kids, and you know, hopefully you'll continue to do that for many years. I want to thank everybody for listening. Coach Warner, thank you so much for being a guest today.
Thank you, Jake, and good luck.
Okay. Tune in again for another new episode of the Educational AD. Please like and share and follow and do all those great things. And until the next time, this is the Educational AD.